policy, Keynes devoted much, if not most of his career to rethinking monetary matters. The monetary policy of the Roosevelt administration, from beginning to end, followed broadly Keynesian lines, and this policy, through which Roosevelt reinvented the United States dollar, was a central and successful instrument for both recovery from the Great Depression and victory in the Second World War. We could still learn valuable lessons from Roosevelt's creation of a Keynesian dollar. That monetary policy helps determine how much wealth we have and how justly we distribute it, and whether we find ourselves nearer to peace or war with other nations. That we should not let bankers' fears of inflation drive economic policies that affect the whole world. And that we need political leaders who understand that widespread prosperity is not only a matter of economic efficiency or business success, but also a moral issue, contributing to the strength of a nation's institutions and the soundness of its values. Money is a government's promise made palpable, and if we cannot trust it to work for us, we must question the worth of representative government. And perhaps at no time in history has representative government been more threatened than in the 1930s and 1940s. The dollar policy was a priority from the start of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, which began on March 4, 1933, a cold, gray Saturday. Undeterred by the weather, Americans crowded so thickly into the streets of Washington, D.C., that the new president could scarcely get through the throngs to deliver his inaugural address. The spectators were both eager and anxious. The unemployment rate had reached nearly 25%. The previous summer, the U.S. Army had burned out and run off thousands of jobless veterans who came to camp in Washington, D.C. and begged federal assistance, and the leaders of that bonus army said ominously that they would return. Foreclosures had put Americans out of their houses and off their farms. Thousands of banks had failed. The Federal Reserve System itself stood in peril of collapse, as depositors declined to put their trust in the United States dollar, preferring instead to ask for the gold into which paper money was then lawfully convertible. Making his first speech as president, Roosevelt needed to stop the panic. "So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts," he said. Then the president promised Americans that bankers would no longer unduly influence the nation's leaders. "The money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization," he said. Roosevelt promised he would restore that temple to the ancient truths, bringing back social values more noble than mere monetary profit. To keep the money changers at bay, Roosevelt would have to change the money. He pledged an adequate but sound currency. It was the last of the lines of attack he proposed at his inauguration, and the first he would pursue in his presidency. Late the next night, after a harried day of consultation with members of the outgoing administration and people in his own team, Roosevelt was ready to sign an order to stop the panic by closing banks and ending the dollar's convertibility to gold. Walter Wyatt, chief counsel for the Federal Reserve Board, stopped him. It was still Sunday, Wyatt said, and the deeply religious note of the inaugural address might be impaired if the president signed the order on the Lord's Day. The signature could wait a few moments. It would be Monday soon enough. And so, early on March 6, 1933, Roosevelt officially stopped the gold standard from functioning in the United States. 2 days later, he told reporters that this suspension was no temporary measure, but instead the first step to a new, permanent system in which policymakers would manage the amount of money in circulation to ensure an end to the Depression and keep it from coming back. Then, on March 12th, he took to the radio for the first in a series of fireside chats with the American people, to whom he explained his monetary policy, saying there were things more important than gold, including confidence, courage, and faith in our plan. By the end of the summer, the president had publicized and clarified his plan for the dollar. No longer would the amount of currency in circulation depend on the quantity of gold in the nation's vaults. it would
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.